Saddam Hussein was captured, he was executed, but there was no WMDs. The United States was caught in the middle of a civil war and an insurgency. Iraq was turning into chaos. What was the United States going to do? They needed help in Iraq, but they weren't finding a lot of countries around the world that were willing to help them because a lot of those countries didn't agree with the war in the first place, and they felt that the United States was arrogant in any way to go into Iraq. So they weren't going to get help there. So the United States' plan at the time, and George W. Bush's plan at the time, was to divert American troops from Afghanistan. Remember, that war is still going on as well at the time. They were going to divert American troops from Afghanistan to Iraq. This was not a decision that Jean Chrétien was going to help make anymore. He resigned as prime minister in December of 2013, and his role was going to be was taken over by his long-term liberal rival and finance minister Paul Martin. Now, Paul Martin was asked by George W. Bush to help or to send more troops to Afghanistan to help relieve pressure. Paul Martin was almost more than willing to help out in this endeavor. He believed in nation building and helping the people of Afghanistan help themselves and providing security so that all these reforms could happen. So he was given the responsibility to send more troops to Afghanistan, and he did. It was called Operation Archer, and and Canada was given Kandahar. It was a province that was given to them to kind of look after. It was previously occupied by the British and the United States, but they were now sending a lot more troops to Iraq, so they couldn't afford to keep troops there anymore. Kandahar was the most unstable of all the provinces. All the other provinces in Afghanistan were being taken over or were being administered by a lot of other NATO countries. A lot of those other NATO countries took the provinces that were safe and up in the north here, where there wasn't a whole lot of Taliban activity, but Canada was left with Kandahar, and this was by far the worst one that they could have taken. The Taliban, although they were technically not in Afghanistan anymore, were starting to creep back in. And they owned territory all along the Afghan-Pakistan border, and they could freely move across those borders and get support from Pakistan as well. So Canada was not in a very good situation being in Kandahar. So many Canadian troops were being killed by what were called improvised explosive devices being used as roadside bombs. So they would hide these bombs underneath roads, and they'd wait for Canadian troop trucks and cars and that kind of thing, military vehicles to drive over them or beside them, and then they would blow them up. Here's a picture. They're just crude, huge artillery shells that were set up and detonated by cell phones. Very crude, but just very, very nasty stuff. So all the while this is going on, Canadian troops are supposed to win the hearts and minds of Afghanis and to help them rebuild their country after decades of war. Afghanistan is a very, very tragic story, and it was the Canadian military's hope and Paul Martin's hope and a lot of other people's hope that Canada could help change Afghanistan and make it a more peaceful place to live, especially for its children. But at what price? 158 Canadians died during the mission in Afghanistan. Most of them were as a result of improvised explosive devices. A lot of them were from suicide, other enemy fire, friendly fire. It was not a very. This is a very tragic story when it comes to the Canadian military, and it was especially hard even on programs like Hockey Night in Canada. Don Cherry would show a picture of a fallen Canadian soldier. I remember in one particular episode, at the end of the year, it was around New Year's, he showed a slideshow of, I think it was around, at that point, 130 had died. He showed 130 dead soldiers on his program. And that really was kind of hitting home to people. Should Canada be involved in this kind of place? Is Afghanistan savable? And in 2010, Stephen Harper made the judgment call that it wasn't. And in 2010, he made the decision that Canada was going to withdraw its military commitments from Afghanistan by 2014. And much of the mission's focus at that point was going to be training the Afghan military to take on the Taliban on their own.